What is CSS? What is it in relation to, the whole web, the package and what is the web and those types of things. Um, Flex that's being talked about here is Flexbox versus grid layout. I've done both. Actually, if you look at my, if you want to see an example of a grid layout, your knowledge gaps in the newer stuff. Okay. If you want to look in the grid, if you want to look at an example of the grid layout, my date time component, the selector part, uses grid layout. It needs to be equal across all days. I was initially thinking of using Flexbox actually, and then realized that it would then depend upon the content inside of it, and so you might end up not being able to as easily make it work the way you'd want it to. Better way was to use grid layout, and things of that nature. So there is some code out there that I've got about using grid layout. Now, granted, that does use Tailwind, but the Tailwind classes are very similar to the actual CSS classes. That's another reason I like to use Tailwind. If you know the CSS classes, you can pretty much guess at what the Tailwind class will be, and you'll be right most of the time. Plus, my IDE also autocompletes a lot of that for me. As long as I'm typing it into a certain type of field, it'll pick up that it needs that. You use Bootstrap for a while, and it's kind of like jQuery. It abstracts the under the hood stuff. Yeah, Bootstrap's great. The problem I've always had with Bootstrap, and this is what people say too, is Bootstrap sites look like Bootstrap sites. So yeah, when you use Bootstrap, your site looks like Bootstrap. So it kind of comes out looking like that. Tailwind is really good in that, like I said, it is a framework of sorts, but really what it is, it's almost like it's not quite a one-to-one mapping, but a lot of the classes that you use are really a single property in CSS. So yes, it does make, and people have made this comment before, and there's back and forth, and I'm not getting into that whole argument about that, about how long your CSS becomes, and it's basically like you're writing CSS inside of the HTML. I still like it because I've been in a lot of applications that have been long lived, or come into an application that's already been developed for some time, and managing huge files of CSS and trying to keep track of all the different classes and what class does what and all that kind of stuff always seemed to bother me. It just, because it's really hard to remember, oh, this class does this class does this class does this. Tailwind is like, this class is for this property and this setting, and that's what you use. So you say, okay, I want this and this and this, bam, you just pop it in there. Tailwind has their own site too. You can go through and you can find a particular type of setting you're looking for, and it'll tell you all the different settings and all the names of them. And so it's really easy to look up. They've got a really easy search on their site, and like I said, a lot of the IDEs out there have the ability to do IntelliSense when you're typing in a Tailwind class to kind of do some autocomplete for you. Like I said, I use WebStorm, and it does autocomplete in Tailwind for us. So it's easier to use that way, I feel. Anyways, let's kind of head down where we're going to go today, which was, the basics of CSS, what CSS is, why CSS was really sort of invented, which is pretty obvious. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. And so obviously the first S in there is style, and that's exactly what CSS was about. Early days of web were pretty basic. We saw actually the first live stream I did on HTML. We saw how convoluted it would have to get to do some more advanced structures and sizings and all those kinds of things, all the different tables inside of tables, kind of embedding and moving things here and there, and how all those things had to work. So CSS brings a lot of nice features to the table, brings the ability to add things like paddings and margins, and now with as Robert here has mentioned, now with Flexbox and things like that. When Flexbox came out, it made it made basically what is now considered mobile first design really possible. Flexbox, sort of determines how much space each cell in a particular row gets based upon the size that of the user's screen, and the size of the items within each item. Also, they can then flip. So if you have something where you go into a more mobile type view, it then allows you to sort of hey, Rob, how's it going? It allows you to then have it put inside of an actual uh, phone and things like that. It'll actually flip the design, and so things that would normally be displayed across now get displayed like this. I'm getting way ahead of myself, but yeah, that's really where Flexbox kind of comes in and the conversation to that. And Grid is a little bit more structured. You have a certain size, and you want to make sure that each item gets a certain amount of size, regardless of what the inside is, regardless of how much content is inside. Like I said, in my date time selector, you didn't want a cell with the number 1 in it to look different than a cell with the number 31 in it. You want all the cells to look the same size, and you want them to have a very consistent structure across the board, and that's where Grid comes in. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. So like I said, CSS is cascading style sheets. It's about bringing style to the web, to something that took a lot of work to do. I remember when I first started doing web, it was very image heavy. That was a lot of things that you would see. You would see people design a lot of images and things of that nature to really give style, because there wasn't a whole lot of it out there. And then CSS came along. CSS came along pretty close to HTML, so it's not like it was that far off. But yeah, I do remember some of the earlier days before I even learned CSS and all that kind of stuff. And once you started getting into it, CSS allows you to put styles on things and make things look make things look really good really fast with very little effort. And we will see that here very shortly in what I'm talking about. Actually, let's go ahead. I don't think I really need to go into too much more depth. Yeah, exactly. I've had to do table, and like I said, if you find my first HTML, I think we did 3 or 4 HTML live streams. If you find the very first one, I actually did an example where that's what we did. We did tables inside of tables. We did nothing but a table background, just to kind of showcase what we used to have to do. So let's get on to the example here. Let's see here. I do have it. Yes, I do. All right. You learned HTML in 96. That's probably about when I learned HTML, in all honesty. 1996, that sounds about right for me as well. Let's see here. We're going to share the screen. Let's make sure everything's looking good. All right. I'm going to go ahead, hang on here, and hide the chat so we got a little bit bigger so everyone can see better. I'll still bring it up over here, though, so I can see what you guys are saying. There we go. All right. Now, so this is, very basic HTML. We in the HTML5 intro, we learned about the nav and about the different HTML5 tags and things of that nature. How nav in and of itself really doesn't do a whole lot. It's really a lot more for things like accessibility, screen readers, and things like that, to tell screen readers that this section you're coming upon is a navigation. It's not uncommon, if you look at a lot of sites, to see navigations, basic navigations, especially like top navigations that we're going to be creating here, to use UL and LI elements. This is unordered list and list element. That's what these tags stand for. So with no styling whatsoever, this is basically what you get. You get just a list of, a bullet point list of different things. Doesn't really do a whole lot. Doesn't really look like a whole lot. It doesn't look like a menu. It doesn't look like any kind of menu system at all. So that's where we need to bring in things like CSS. So what I've done over here is I've gone ahead and commented out the finer points of CSS, and we will actually do some modification and showcase how some of these things work, and I'll talk about them. I'll talk about what this is and talk about other ways that this can work and how that kind of works, why I chose to go this route, and all that kind of stuff. So as you can see, all of our menu stuff starts with the class name menu. So we'll go ahead over here and we will just put class is equal to menu. So if we do that and we save, it won't look great, but you'll see that we got rid of the little items there, and now suddenly this is no longer listed vertically, but now it's listed horizontally. Doesn't really look very great, but let's find out what we've done. So what we've done is we've taken away the list style, which took away the little bullet point there. We've taken away the margins and the paddings, which was giving it, if you notice, there was a bit of a space originally about right here, that much space out there. So we've taken out the margins and padding space, and I went ahead, I want it listed across, and look what I used. I used display flex. Now display flex by default displays any items underneath that flex and underneath that that particular element across. So it lists them out, from left to right across. You do have ways of reversing the way that goes. If you're on like a site, if you're building a site specifically for like Japanese or something like that, where they do right to left instead of left to right, you can switch the order. You can do is it call reverse, or yeah, there is a way to do to reverse the order in which these things are displayed. But by default, it uses what most countries use, which is most countries read left to right. So that's what happens here. So basically, we've now got this listed to where it's starting to look more like a top level menu. That's the goal of what we're trying to do here, and all that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly uncomment this and just move it down to there. So if we save, we'll get a little bit better looking. And so, yeah, now what we've done is basically we put a color behind it, and we put some padding. Basically, whenever you do padding like this, it starts at the top. It goes top and then around, what would that be, clockwise. So top, right, left, bottom. And that's how this works. So I wanted 8 pixels to the right, so we have more padding between each menu item. But I still wanted to have a little bit of padding around this, because when I initially did this, I only put padding to the right, and it looked really compressed. It didn't look as good. So I went ahead and put some padding all around. Let me just do a quick check here. A semantic div, yeah. Display flex, yes, exactly. So yes, display flex is the way you actually set the flex box setting. That's correct. And so what we've got here is relatively good. It looks better, at least. We have these items listed out. They do actually look, there's enough of space between them. We probably could put a bit more space, honestly, now that I'm looking at it. It does look it looks a little too tight in there. That's a little bit better. That gives us a little bit more spacing. And so now we've got items listed out, but it doesn't really do much. It doesn't really respond much. We don't really see this as a menu. It's just some text that happens to have a light gray background. So we'll go ahead and we'll do our last piece here, and that is bringing in hover effects. So with hover effects now, as we highlight, we'll see which item we're over. Plus we brought in the little pointer in there. So now the pointer makes it look like that it's a menu item, because when we highlight over, when we're away, the pointer's gone. When we're back, the pointer's there. So as we highlight over, now we see different items here. Now we could have gone a lot further with this, but it would have required some JavaScript. For example, we could have made it to where when we clicked on one of these items, we could have had it stay on that item. That could have been the selected item. That would have required at least some level of JavaScript involvement there to actually mark that item as selected. So I left that out because we're not going down that path yet. Once we get to JavaScript, we'll probably implement something like that. But that's sort of the idea of what we're talking about here. We've got the basic menu to remove the basic look of the unordered list, and take out its margins, and make it ordered the direction we want. When we do this here, now here's something we'll talk about. So this item here inside of CSS, basically menu is where we started at. So let's go back to here again real quick. So our UL is menu, and then directly a direct decedent of UL, and this is how it has to work, by the way, inside of HTML, is LI. So UL requires that the next item to work, I'm pretty sure it does require, that it must be a list item. And so That's why we did it this way, and that's also why we can do this. Now, what this means in CSS is this is basically saying only for the next only for when an element is marked with menu. If the next item is of an li tag type, so if it's a list item, then I want to apply the background color of light gray and the padding like we talked about here. Same kind of thing here. If it's a menu item, the next item is a list item, and if our pointer is hovered over it, then I want to show the cursor as pointer, and I want the background color to change from light gray to dark gray. This also kind of brings in the concept of the cascading part of cascading style sheets. Since this is in one sheet, the direction in which we do this does matter. I am wondering if this would cause anything to go wrong. I could be wrong. There could be different pieces to it as well, that if I put hover here, hover may have its own um, precedent. It does. So hover does have a precedent. Normally, in any kind of style sheet, the direction or the order you put the item in here is also going to be the order in which the style is applied. In this case, hover is its own special thing because it's actually sort of a interactive. It has some interactive pieces to it, in that we're actually detecting a hover. If hover wasn't here, and if we were trying to apply things in a particular order for list items, and we moved this up to here, whatever happened here would be applied. Boy, I hate the way that thing pops up. Whatever happens here would be applied before whatever happens here. So that's the cascading part of cascading style sheets. So the order in which the styles are put in the sheet and the order in which the sheets are registered within the site matter. That's the cascading part of cascading style sheets. So the lower the registration point of your sheet, that's the one that will override any styles that are above it. So that's how that works. That's how the cascading part of cascading style sheet works. It has to do with order listed within the actual file itself first, and then order of files that are actually registered within the site itself. So the further down that a style is set, the higher the precedent it will take. In other words, it will override something above it if there is such a property. In this case, background color, like I said, is that property. But since we have hover, it didn't really matter which order we put it in, because hover is going to take precedent because of the action that it is. Let's see here. And yes, can you show the equivalent padding in EM? Yes. EM is a really good thing to talk about. I believe you're talking about the pixels here. So the pixels here depend upon what the base, when you're talking about EMs, and I don't use, let's see here. I don't use EMs, I use REMs. And the reason for that is because EMs can be affected by a parent that has a different font size. So, for example, if you have your base font size, which I think most base font sizes are set around 16 pixels. If you have a base font size set at 16 pixels, and you're using EMs, but if you have another a off of the parent, but above your actual child, where it's wrapped around your child, so it is a parent of your child, and its font size is different, the EM calculation will be different for that section. Now, if you want that to happen, then go ahead and do that. But if you want your EMs to always be based upon the font size, use REM, not EM, and that's the difference between EM and REM. EM takes the most recent parent font size, whereas REM takes the base parent font size. I'd be willing to bet that this is 16 pixels. Like I said, that's pretty common. If this is 16 pixels, that would make that zero. This is 0.25 REM. Let's see if that changes anything. That shouldn't. No, it didn't. So I'm right. It is 16 pixels. So basically, then if we do 0.25 rims and 0.25 rims. That was a very good point. Now let's see here. 10. The math would escape me, of course. Let's see here. 8 would be half. 8 would be 0.5. No. Yeah. 8 would be 0.5. So it would probably be, let's just guess at this and say, let's say 0.6. I might be a little bit off on that, but I'm not going to sit there and worry about the math of this right now. So 0.6 rims. If we save that, let's see if we have any shift at all. I was right. I was right. 0.6 is 10. Okay, perfect. So yes. Now, that brings up a very good point. So why did we just do that? The reason we did that is because as things change, as you go into, especially when you move from like a desktop situation into a mobile situation, many times, especially in a mobile situation, you might have your base font size increased to make it look bigger. You then want your padding to correspond with that as well. If you use pixels, it'll always be the same size, and sometimes you need a bit more padding, especially on mobiles. You need a bit more padding because you're no longer clicking with a mouse that's as precise. Now you're clicking with a finger. So if you have these little itty bitty paddings and you're trying to actually click on it with the finger, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. It's good to have rims so that as the base font size changes, so does the actual amount of padding or whatever it may be that you're actually using applies. When I did that, I did it because I just wanted to do a really quick and dirty example. I didn't want to work through the whole rim concept last night. And it was last night when I was doing this, so I was kind of at the end of my brain. So really didn't want to do it at that time and try to go through and figure all that out. So yes, that's so the question about, are we talking about direct subchild? Yes, this here we were talking about before is a direct subchild action. So basically that means, let's go back to this. Basically, if menu, and then you have the greater than, well, I guess it'd be greater than sign, yeah, to li, that means that the li has to be a direct decedent of this, of whatever menu is applied to for these styles to take hold. Now, we could do this differently. We don't have to do the direct decedent. What we could do, quite simply, is that. This will still work, as you'll see. Now, what's the difference? Still works. Everything's still the same. Nothing changed whatsoever. What's the difference between what I had previously and what I have here? The difference is, technically, this would work if there was something else around menu. So if there was another piece of markup over here between the UL and the LI, for example, I don't know if this will actually cause an issue or not, but we'll give it a shot. If we did this, for example, let's see if it does. See, it did mess it up because of the direct. Oh, well, I'm wondering if anyone can tell me why that messed that up. I actually do know why that messed that up. It still worked for the most part. If you look, you'll still get the hover and all that, because like I said, these items apply to any decedent, not a direct decedent. When you do it this way, you're applying it to any decedent, not a direct decedent. The only difference is because of this right here, because display flex will only work on the direct decedent. It will only flex the direct decedent element. And now the direct decedent element is no longer the li elements, but it's the div element here. And that is why what I just did there caused it to go vertical instead of going horizontal like we had it before. So the style still applied. If we came in here and we put this back with that div in there, now we'll see it won't look very good at all. There we go. This is still there because this is still applied at the actual UL level, but this breaks now because the LI is no longer a direct decedent of menu. So therefore, we don't get the background color, we don't get the hover, we don't get the pointer. So that's how CSS, and in a very basic way at least, works and allows us to do these kinds of things. if we wanted to make this work, what we could do is we could say, fine, we could do this. I wanted to do it differently, but I don't want to put more styles in there. So if we did this, and we can just leave it that way. It doesn't matter that we have it there. There we go. It's back. Why is it back? Because the div is now wrapping the list elements, and now we've applied display flex to the div, which now is a direct parent of the li elements. So this still works once again because we're skipping over the div in this case. For menu, we're skipping over the div and finding the other li elements, and still able to apply the styling to the li elements because we aren't searching for a direct decedent. There are, by the way, a lot of different parent-child relationship type things in CSS. I won't talk about them here today. That's probably going to be its own stream, because there are so many different ones and the ways they work and how things come up, like being able to style things based on even and odd numbers. And now with CSS, there's new ways to do media queries, which I want to bring up. I want to have a stream about how the new media query stuff is done to make it a lot simpler. I want to try it out myself too. I haven't actually had a chance to try out the new media query stuff myself yet, so that's going to be a lot of fun too. But yeah, there's a lot of recent additions to CSS that really kind of bring things around and make it a bit easier to work with. So yes, flex, exactly. So let's see, is there anything else really to talk about? Oh yes, I was going to bring this up. That's what I was going to do. So let's just revert what we have. We were just playing around here anyways, so we will do this and this, and we can go in here. We can leave that. This looks nice and all, and it does sort of its thing, but there's plenty of other things that we could add to this. Let's see here. Let me see if I can remember what I was going to do. So I think I was going to do border bottom. Let's see here. Let's do, well, we're into the whole rim thing. So why don't we stick with the whole rim thing? Maybe 0.15 rim. Solid blue. Let's see if that actually works. It does. All right, look at that. Now, isn't that just one of the coolest things you've ever seen? So we can do simple things. There's very simple things like this whole border bottom trick I just threw in here to maybe bring a little bit more style to what we're doing, make it a little bit nicer. We may say, black doesn't look very good, so we need to change the color to white. And there we go with that. Maybe not so good, but you get the idea. We can basically make this work however we need to make this work. So a lot of interesting things that you can do, a lot of things you can just sort of play with CSS. A lot of different ways you can make this work. It depends on how you want to do it, how strict you want to be in the way that you apply your styles. What do you want to do? Basically, what do you want to do in the end? So that's what it comes down to a lot of times for this type of stuff. And yeah, it's just I'd like to go into more, but to go into too much more would be to spend a lot more time than I have allotted. So yeah, like I said, nice styles type stuff. You can play with this as much as you want to. If anyone wants, I can leave this sandbox sitting around for a little while. If anyone wants a link to it, it's in a draft mode. I'm not sure what I have to do to get it out of a draft mode. I might try to see if I can actually save this and if it can then be played with. I use Code Sandbox. You guys can't see that, can you now? But the site I'm using here is codesandbox.io, all one word, codesandbox.io.